Does Jack Smith believe that the Supreme Court immunity decision does not pose a major impediment to prosecuting Trump? Apparently he does. Apparently he thinks he can get around this. Because what he did yesterday afternoon, day after tomorrow, by the way, Friday, is the day that Judge Tanya Chutkan has requested that both Jack Smith and Trump's lawyers submit their kind of final briefs about how they're going to deal with the Supreme Court's decision that if you're president, you can commit crimes and get away with them as long as they are, quote, official acts, which is just bizarre to begin with. It's obviously something it is completely opposite of what was discussed at the Constitutional Convention. It's the opposite of what you find in the Federalist Papers. It's the opposite of what the founders had in mind. They wanted the president to be a citizen. In fact, they were very careful to make sure that the commander-in-chief was not a member of the military. He's a civilian. He's the civilian with oversight over the military. So anyway, Jack Smith had originally indicted Trump for 4 charges, and those 4 charges still stand. But he rewrote the indictment, and he didn't just rewrite the indictment. He went back, he got a whole brand new grand jury. And what's amazing to me is nobody knew this was going on, right? This guy impaneled a grand jury, brought evidence before that grand jury, brought witnesses before that grand jury. That grand jury met in secret. They voted unanimously to indict Donald Trump again for these same 4 crimes, only this time they excluded a couple of things that Trump had done in the first indictment that had to do with his interactions with his staff or his interactions with the Department of Justice, because those could be considered official acts. But what they did is they basically restarted the whole thing. At the very beginning of this, the first sentences of this new indictment, it says Donald Trump was a candidate for office. He was acting not as president, an official act, but was acting as a candidate in 2020 when he did these things, and early 2021 when he led January 6th. He was acting as a candidate for office, not in his official capacity, and therefore he enjoys no immunity. And then they lay out those things as a candidate that he did. And they also include his conversations with Mike Pence, pointing out that, number one, Mike Pence was elected separately from Donald Trump. We think that the vice president and president are elected at the same time, right, because they're a combined ticket. But in fact, when you get your ballot, you will have a check mark for president and you will have a check mark for vice president. They are elected separately. So number one, Mike Pence himself was running for re-election. He was also a candidate. And number two, Mike Pence, in his role of counting the ballots and verifying the election essentially, or certifying the election, he was acting in his role as president of the Senate. Now, Article 1 defines the House and the Senate. And the Article 1 says that the vice president shall be the president of the United States Senate. Article 2 defines the president and the presidency. And Article 2 is pretty silent on that role, or any role, frankly, for the vice president. Article 3, of course, is the courts. And that's it. That's our Constitution. I mean, there's other articles, of course, but those are the 3 branches of government. So what Jack Smith is saying is that even Trump's interactions with Pence, even though it was president to vice president, were not actually president to vice president. They were candidate Trump begging president of the Senate, Pence, to refuse some ballots and accept other ballots. I think this is fascinating. The 4 charges that Donald Trump has been charged with are conspiracy to defraud the United States. In other words, steal an election. Right? Your votes don't count. Number 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. In other words, the January 6th attempt to shut down the counting of the Electoral College vote. Number 3, obstruction of and attempted obstruction of an official proceeding. So the second one was conspiracy. The third one was the actual act of January 6th. And number 4, conspiracy against rights. And this is that you and I have a right to vote. Now, this one the Supreme Court might disagree with. But Jack Smith is asserting, under federal law, 1993 National Voter Rights Act, you and I have as citizens have a right to have our votes counted. In the Constitution, with the amendments, it now says that if you are female, you have a right to vote. In the 13th Amendment, 13th or 14th Amendment, it says if you are black, you have a right to vote. Or maybe it's the 15th Amendment. I have to go back and look. But, the post-Civil War amendments. So at least women and African Americans have an explicit right to vote in the Constitution. So, charge number 4, conspiracy against rights, 18 U.S.C. 241. So he got a new grand jury. These are the same charges as before. Trump is saying, hey, you can't bring cases before an election, right before an election. Well, actually, we're not within 60 days of the election, number one. We are 69 days, I think, right now. Sean's been keeping track of it. Is it on the one sheet? Yeah, it's on the one sheet. 69 days to election day today. And so we're not 60 days out, number one. Number two, that's not a law. That's simply a policy within the Department of Justice. And it's a policy that in 2016 got violated by Jim Comey when 2 weeks before the election, he comes out and holds a press conference and says, we're looking into Hillary Clinton's emails again, which shaved 3 points off her popularity. So Trump's complaints, and he is just whining up a storm. He posted repeatedly on Truth Social overnight, I'm just not fair. This is manipulated. It was rigged. Mark Zuckerberg. One of his complaints is that Mark Zuckerberg was asked not to publish stories about Hunter Biden's laptop. Well, that was the Trump administration that asked Mark Zuckerberg not to publish those stories. It was the Trump Department of Justice. Yeah, as Kamala Harris would say, I'll ask it again, Mr. Trump. Can you tell me who was president in 2020? He makes clear that the co-conspirators who are being indicted along with Donald Trump were, well, actually, I'm not sure if they're indicted or not. I think that this indictment may just be for Trump, but they were labeled as co-conspirators, that they were acting in their private capacity. There were a couple originally, at least one in particular, who was removed from this indictment. That was Jeffrey Clark, because he was actually working for the Department of Justice at the time. So he's no longer included as a co-conspirator here, because that could have been considered an official act. But this is going after, they said the only people that they claimed were co-conspirators were those people who were attorneys or political consultants who helped Trump prepare his election interference and fraud. And those people who told in his campaign. Now, originally they had, in the indictment, they had a bunch of people in the Department of Justice and the vice president telling him that he hadn't won the election, that he lost fair and square, 7 million votes. They replaced that with his campaign aides who told him that he lost the election, which is in some ways even more dramatic. I think this is going to work. Now, how is this going to play out? The way it's going to play out is fairly straightforward. They're going to go before Judge Chutkan on Friday. There's going to be, Trump is going to appeal the entire thing. Judge Chutkan is going to have to make a determination in the next couple of weeks or months about which parts of Jack Smith's indictment, this is the 5th grand jury to indict Donald Trump, by the way. This new grand jury indictment, which parts of it will withstand scrutiny based on this Supreme Court decision that presidents get to commit crimes if they want under certain circumstances. Then that will be appealed by Trump to the appeals court. And whatever the appeals court rules, that will be appealed either by Trump or by Jack Smith to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court will make a decision. And all this is going to happen next year. None of this is going to happen before the election. The one thing that's possible before the election is that Judge Chutkan, maybe on Friday, will set up in the next couple of weeks, a sort of little mini trial where she says, okay, Jack Smith, present your proof that this doesn't violate the Supreme Court order or ruling. And in the context of doing that, Smith will be able to lay out some of the proof of the crimes that he's asserting Trump committed to get that in the public discussion. But that could have, quote, affect an election. I don't know. We'll see. And is that within 60 days? And will the DOJ allow him to do that? And what is Merrick Garland going to say about this? Because he runs the DOJ, and he seems to be quite a stickler for the rules. All of these things are up in the air right now. But the bottom line is it looks like Jack Smith is really committed to nailing Trump's ass to the wall, number one. Number two, of course, he's also rebutted and basically just slapped down Judge Aileen Cannon's dismissal of his charges against Trump down in Florida for stealing classified data, documents.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So Jack Smith ain't going away any day soon. He definitely is not going away. Get back.